Michelle, the flying scammer.
Welcome to this, our final episode of 2020 of Apex Instant Tips, and our last episode before Christmas. Coming to you live every Friday at 12:05 EST for 5 minutes from Massachusetts. My name is Hayden.
And I'm Anton. And Hayden, I see you are in the holiday spirit. I was a little behind making that happen, but I did grab my old, you can almost see it, Apex or Oracle Ace Director vest to throw on to try and join in.
Very festive. As
you know, and as everyone knows, we only have 5 minutes to present our tip, and we should get going on it. I understand we are asking a colleague to join me in some cinematic universe today.
We have Neil, our longtime friend and colleague, who is going to give us 5 minutes of his time to give us one of his favorite tips.
Absolutely. Excellent. So Neil, welcome. And I see you got the message on the holiday gear. Nicely done. So Hayden, let's get this going. We'll kick off our 5 minutes. And Neil, you are on the spot for 5 minutes of instant tip.
Starting the timer, and I'll keep you posted as we go. Yeah.
Sounds good. We'll see if we can get this done in 5. So today I'll be showing QuickSQL. It's been around for a bit, but now it's integrated into the SQL workshop. So if you're inside of here, you go to SQL workshop, utilities, and here's QuickSQL. So before I start, I'm just going to explain what it is and how you can use it. So there's a help section. I'm not going to read it, but it'll help generate SQL very quickly for you, minimal lines of code, and it helps when building a relational data model. So
really, it should be quick DDL, I think.
Yeah, I think they should take note of that. My name change, but it I've used it many times, and it's independent of if you're building an app or not. Just proof of concept, talking about things. It's a good whiteboard to go to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and show an example. I'm going to drop some code in here of a real example that we were brainstorming with, and go over how we got from 9 lines over here to 36, 54, however if you want to count comments. So I decided to create a table here. So at the top level, you see your table. It's called SharePoint site. And this was creating tables for SharePoint to keep metadata about it. And the column is below it, denoted by 2 spaces here. And then you see data types, you see some other directives. And rather than me explaining and going to the help section, I just want to show a neat feature is that they introduced recently. When you're using this tool, if you don't know how to use it, clicking help is a tremendous tool, and I used to do it constantly. But now you could just do / and you'll see the directives pop up. So, and it kind of explains right there, adds a between, creates check constraint. It's cut off because I'm zoomed in, but there's kind of no need to go to the help section anymore with this in here. And it's been a huge help.
So like, for example, line 3 really should probably be unique, right? So you could just throw in a unique constraint on that. I'm going to take up your time and make you do it. There we go.
Do it. Let's put unique in there. And site ID right there, not generate SQL. There we go. It created the constraint right here. Constraint, unique, not null. So that's a good point. And do you guys notice anything in here that we should possibly change? Anything?
Well, so I know that the default for values that QuickSQL doesn't have any special AI for is, in fact, VC 4000. So I suspect it is unnecessary to specify VC 4000 for both lines 3 and 4. It might assume that line 3 is a number if you don't specify VC, but it definitely will assume that I'm betting that 4 will default to VC 4000.
I know you're correct on both of those. So it did assume because it had ID. It's smart. It did change it to a number. So for that one, we'll leave it, right? We'll leave it VC 4000 just because.
Well, and I think you can drop
VC.
Yeah,
let's do VC. Just like Hayden said. So this little amount of code, we could reduce to even less code. So one thing I do want to note is that when creating tables, I didn't necessarily used to comment on columns. And I find it very useful to do so when someone comes to look at a table. So as easy as putting in a comment in your code with dash dash, the same concept applies here. If you put a comment in at the column level, it will create a comment on the column for you. And I find this very useful.
That's awesome.
So, and
we have 1 minute to go.
1 minute. Okay. So last thing before I go is there's many things you can do here, but one powerful portion is the settings region. And in here, you could set your standards, whatever you guys do as your standards. One thing I like to do, or many of us, is use audit columns. So if I go ahead and apply audit columns, you'll see here, now you have audit columns on your table, created by, and not only that, it takes into context Apex and does a coalesce to see who the user is, and if they're, otherwise it uses the database user. And you can change all these settings, and there's many, many, many more. So that's.
So I want to make sure we get in our tip that if you do make these changes, you can actually publish a standard. If you scroll to the bottom of the right-hand side, the settings that you've set all end up right here. So your organization can take this list of settings and publish that as your standard. You just grab that comment on line 92, put it on the top of your first QuickSQL there, and it will apply whatever standard you have. So that's a great way to make sure that anyone using QuickSQL has that. So I'm going to.
And that is time, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So sorry, Neil, I got the last word on that one. But if you want to take another 5 seconds, we'll give it to you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We'll take them in the questions.
All right. Well, as always, we try to make this happen in 5 minutes and allow anybody that came in just for the 5-minute tip to check out. So if you do want to check out now, be sure to do all the regular social media stuff and send a letter to your congressman, I believe. My understanding is if we get to 2,000, we may get some other play button handmade by my daughter. So, it might be a paper plate play button. Who knows?
That keeps me motivated.
Excellent. So, Hayden, I am on vacation today, so I can stay for 5 more minutes or 10 minutes. I've squeezed this into my vacation date. Neil, do you have time to stick around for a few?
I do.
All right. So let's do it. We have to give you a rating. We'll get in a wisdom of the week and take some questions. So if you have questions on this topic or others, I suppose, we'll do our best with those in the next few minutes. So a rating. So I love this tip. There's so much there. It was just really a taste. So I'm going to give this a rating of the beer tasting flight at Barrel House Z. Barrel House Z is a local brewery owned by a friend of mine. You can get a flight of, a couple ounces of 4 different beers. And once you taste those 4 different beers, you realize there's so much more there. And so today's rating is a tasting flight at Barrel House Z.
Now, was that a sponsored rating, Anton, or did you?
I'm hoping it was. I'm looking forward to the results.
I'll provide my address. I'll take a beer.
What's that, Neil?
I'll send my address for some flights of beer.
Yeah, all right. Send it over. I'm confident I can get you at least a tasting. All right, we'll hit our wisdom of the week. This week's wisdom of the week is really apropos. I've run into this a few times. Eventually, someone will notice the inconsistency. There is a movement towards eventual consistency. It's not necessarily bad or good, but this week I noticed that when I was doing Duolingo, it had in my profile that I was in the Amethyst League, but when I was actually competing, I was in the Emerald League. And I was really quite disappointed because I was supposed to have moved up a league, and yet these things were inconsistent. About 18 hours later, it caught up, and I was in the Amethyst League in both cases. But it was absolutely a case of eventual consistency, and eventually someone will notice. So, Hayden, any thoughts on that?
It actually came up apropos with a debugging session that we had together this week. So it feels very timely and certainly has given me food for thought.
Yeah, and that happened about 5 minutes after I had sent off the wisdom of the week to Michelle, the Flying Scamini. And so, Neil, have you ever encountered that?
For sure.
Yeah. I think it's also really interesting because Apex has introduced a new feature. Perhaps this is foreshadowing to another instant tip around scheduling refreshes of data through REST services. And it's something that I think is a great feature. I love it. But whenever you're doing something that's eventually consistent, that will eventually be consistent, someone will notice in the meantime. So something to consider. That is this week's Wisdom of the Week. We will take any questions that people might have. Interesting. How can I define a multi-column primary key?
I don't know if this is possible in QuickSQL. Feel free to correct me on that, Kyle.
I'm just double checking, but I'm going with Hayden on that.
I don't think you can either. And in fact, QuickSQL really looks to generate surrogate primary keys. You can do unique keys, and I recommend that. I don't know that you can even do a composite unique key, but there is a movement, and generally I agree with the surrogate primary key. It's not always the best answer, but QuickSQL definitely drives toward, you can define a primary key. You don't have to use the current surrogate, but QuickSQL does drive toward a surrogate primary key, and I'm not aware of a way to just make a unique key that's composite.
I think Marco makes a great suggestion. I think to your point, Anton, like there's a lot of material here. I think it would be very appropriate to come back and cover more details of QuickSQL at some point.
Right, and you know, I'll put a plug in for, I did an Apex Insider. It was 0 to application in 45 minutes, and it had a significant amount of QuickSQL. And I'm actually, I don't know if you've noticed, I've goofed up. I've said QuickSQL and QuickSQL. I think the folks outside of Oracle in particular would go for the QuickSQL. I noticed for Neil is quite good at always saying SQL instead of shortcutting to SQL.
You know, Neil's tip, this compliment, so distinct from the other tutorials on QuickSQL that I've seen from yourself, Anton, and from Mark Suits and others, typically the flow is QuickSQL is just part of a story. It's you go from data modeling all the way through creating an application. And I think if people only see that, they may not do QuickSQL the justice of understand that it's useful in and of itself. Like even if you aren't planning to create those database objects right there, or save the script, or create an application from that, you can go to QuickSQL and have it create SQL for you.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I actually first started using QuickSQL. As Joel points out, the folks at Oracle actually say QuickSQL. And maybe I'm going to start saying QuickDDL, but I actually started out using it just that way, Hayden, outside of the Apex in general, and it's an extremely valuable tool, regardless of whether you're doing it through Apex or for another purpose. And interestingly, Neil mentioned this right at the beginning, but I find it to be really helpful for sort of brainstorming with customers and clients and users, right? And because you can so quickly change things. And one of the things that it's great with in those scenarios is you can get it to create the drop statements. So it drops whatever you've already created and recreates it, and it will create sample data. So you can really quickly get some data in there and start playing with it and realize that, well, maybe you're defining your data model in a way that's not going to work, but it's so hard to do that without sample data. So having sample data is just a really great feature of it. And like I said, I don't have any problem with dropping and creating tables 20, 30 times during a design session, right? We just crank up the tables, we build them, we look at them, we see if they do it right, and we drop them all and start over. And starting over isn't really starting over with QuickSQL because it's just right there.
That's right.
And one thing I want to mention, a feature that we didn't talk about, was the history. You have the option to make history tables, and that is like, I was working with a client and they have their own script to do that, and it essentially generates exactly what QuickSQL generates. And I'm gonna start calling it QuickSQL now. That's actually what I call it, just so you guys know. But I was talking to somebody who was in a different country, and they always said they didn't know what I was saying. So I said SQL. Now I'm gonna just say SQL moving on forward. So now I'm conflicted. I don't know what to say now.
Yes, yeah, it's a tricky topic amongst purists for sure.
But the history table one is a huge one.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, that's another one where I sometimes, even though I've already generated the history table, I use it to regenerate the trigger, and then I just grab the trigger portion of it. Like, so I'll go back in and I'll keep my QuickSQL that I originally created, and if I've added some tables or some columns to the table, then I will go back to QuickSQL, regenerate the code, just so I don't have to add it for the additional columns, because you get a new trigger for the additional columns. There's only one way to say it.
I'm cool with that.
Actually, what way to say it is Joel advocating for? Actually,
he earlier said QuickSQL
as opposed to QuickSQL.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
So, so we're getting it straight from Joel that
straight from the source.
Yes. Yeah. So, only one way to say it. Well, we are already at one of our longest sessions at 15 minutes. So if I'm going to give it about 3 seconds later for another question to pop up. I don't see one. So I am going to say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all of the items. Don't forget to do all the things, smash the bell, all that kind of thing. And if you hold on for one more second, I think we have a little outgoing music, let's call it.
Let's see it.
Excellent.